Imagine that you're walking through a medieval marketplace, and the fruit stalls are filled with nothing you recognize. No bananas, no pineapples, no perfect red apples lined up in neat rows. Instead, there are fruits that smell like wine, fruits that have to rot before you can eat them, and berries so tart they could strip paint. Today, we're time traveling to medieval orchards and monastery gardens to uncover 15 incredible fruits that once fed entire civilizations, but have now vanished from our tables. First up, a fruit so odd-looking it earned one of the most unfortunate nicknames in history. Imagine a fruit so ugly it earned the medieval nickname open arse, and yet nobles fought over it at royal banquets. Meet the Medlar, nature's most misunderstood masterpiece. Here's the wild part. You couldn't just pick a medlar and eat it. Fresh off the tree, it was hard as a rock and bitter as medicine. Instead, medieval farmers had to let them blet, essentially rot in a controlled way until they turned brown and mushy. Only then did the magic happen. The flesh became creamy, almost custard-like, with a flavor that combined spiced applesauce, sweet wine, and something mysteriously complex that no modern fruit can replicate. Picture monastery cellars lined with straw where hundreds of medlars slowly transformed over weeks. Monks would check them daily, waiting for that perfect moment when firm fruit became liquid gold. They'd eat them with silver spoons, turn them into translucent jellies that glowed like amber, or pair them with aged cheeses at elaborate feasts. Shakespeare himself wrote about medlars, turning them into metaphors for overlooked beauty. Strange, soft, and worth the wait. But the medlar wasn't the only fruit that demanded patience. Deep in the mountains, another oddball was quietly shaping the way medieval people drank, healed, and survived. This tree could survive anything: brutal winters, rocky soil, even periods of complete drought. Its fruit, the Sorb Apple, was the ultimate survival tool, and it came with a secret that made it worth more than gold to struggling farmers. Like the medlar, Sorb apples were inedible when fresh, hard, bitter, and astringent enough to make your mouth feel like sandpaper. But here's where the medieval ingenuity shines. Farmers discovered that these seemingly worthless fruits could be transformed into something extraordinary. Left to blet in cool cellars, they became sweet and wine-like. Even better, they could be pressed into a tart, earthly cider that kept perfectly through the harshest winters. But the real magic was medicinal. Medieval texts describe Sorb apple preparations being used for everything from deadly fevers to snake bites. In an era when a single illness could wipe out entire families, having a tree in your yard that could literally save lives? That was priceless. The wood itself was legendary, so hard and fine-grained that master craftsmen used it for precision instruments and musical tools. This one tree offered food, medicine, preservation, and materials, an entire toolkit for survival. Strange as it sounds, the next fruit left an even more surprising legacy. It helped name hundreds of pubs and fueled a forgotten drink that once rivaled beer. This fruit literally shaped English pub culture, and you've probably never heard of it. The wild service berry, known as Chequers, was the star ingredient in a medieval drink so popular that hundreds of pubs are still named after it today. These small speckled berries looked unremarkable, brown and rough like tiny potatoes. But when autumn frost hit and they began to blet, that is, soften and ripen just shy of rotting, something magical happened. The astringent, mouth-puckering flesh transformed into something sweet and fig-like with a complex flavor that made medieval brewers go wild. Here's where it gets fascinating. Those classic black and white checkered pub signs hanging outside the Chequers taverns, they weren't just decoration. They advertised that this establishment brewed its own Chequer ale, a tangy, earthy drink made from fermented service berries that could knock you sideways after a long day in the fields. The fruit wasn't just for drinking. Medieval physicians served Chequers after heavy meals, believing they aided digestion and settled queasy stomachs. Their firm texture made them perfect for preserving in honey or wine, creating winter treats that lasted for months. But here's the tragedy. As hop cultivation spread and commercial brewing took over, the art of checker making vanished. Entire groves of service trees were cleared, and with them, centuries of brewing knowledge. From the rowdy cheer of English pubs to the solemn hush of monastic gardens, our next fruit was prized not for flavor, but for its power to heal. The Cornelian cherry isn't actually a cherry at all. It's a member of the dogwood family. But this brilliant red fruit was medieval Europe's secret weapon against plague, fever, and death itself. When the Black Death swept across continents, monastery gardens filled with Cornelian cherry trees became islands of hope in an ocean of despair. The fruit's appearance is deceiving. Bright red and cherry-like, but with a flavor that could make you question everything. Raw, they were brutally tart and astringent, like biting into liquid sourness. But medieval monks knew the secret, processed them correctly, and they became liquid medicine. Monastery infirmaries were stocked with Cornelian cherry syrups, carefully prepared to treat fevers, dysentery, and the mysterious ailments that regularly decimated medieval populations. The fruit's intense acidity and natural compounds made it a powerful antiseptic in an age before antibiotics. They weren't just medicine. Skilled cooks turned them into preserves that glowed like rubies, or fermented them into a potent liqueur that could warm you through the coldest winters. The natural dyes extracted from the fruit colored medieval textiles in shades of red that seemed to capture fire itself. The trees were virtually indestructible, surviving droughts, harsh winters, and poor soil that killed other fruit trees. In a world where one bad season could mean starvation, that reliability was literally life-saving. But not every healing fruit came cloaked in mystery. Some shouted their power with color, thorns, and a flavor so sharp it could wake the dead. The barberry was medieval Europe's answer to citrus, providing that crucial acidic punch that transformed bland grains and preserved meats into something approaching delicious. These tiny bright red berries weren't just food, they were medieval multivitamins. Packed with vitamin C, they prevented scurvy during long winters when fresh food was just a memory. But their real power was culinary. Medieval cooks used them like we use lemons today, adding sharp, bright flavors to stews, sauces, and preserves. The plants themselves are living fortresses. Covered in vicious thorns, barberry bushes were often planted as natural security systems around gardens and homes. Try sneaking through a hedge lined with barberry spines. You'd announce your presence with screams that could wake the entire village. Medieval physicians believed barberries could cool the blood and purify the liver. They weren't entirely wrong. Modern science has confirmed the fruit's anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. The plant's bark and roots were also harvested for dyes that produced brilliant yellows and oranges. But here's the tragic irony. In the 19th century, entire barberry populations were destroyed when scientists discovered they hosted a fungus that damaged wheat crops. Centuries of cultivation were wiped out in just a few decades. We now travel back to the Silk Road's golden age, when spices, silks, and precious stones flowed between east and west like rivers of wonder. Among them came a golden fruit that would transform medieval European orchard, the loquat. Unlike every other fruit on this list, loquats were genuinely sweet and pleasant to eat fresh. Their golden skin housed flesh that tasted like a perfect blend of apricot, peach, and subtle citrus, pure sunshine in fruit form. But what made them truly special was their timing. Loquats ripened in early spring, becoming the first fresh fruit after months of preserved foods and dried rations. Picture medieval nobles, pale from winter's confinement, tasting their first loquat of the season. After months of root vegetables and salted meats, that burst of fresh, sweet flavor must have felt like a resurrection. Arab traders and physicians who brought loquats westward valued them for more than taste. They were prescribed for coughs, inflammation, and digestive troubles. Medieval Arabic medical texts describe the loquat preparations as treatments for everything from chest congestion to skin conditions. The trees themselves were remarkably unique. Blooming in winter when everything else was dormant, their white flowers standing out like stars against bare branches. This gave them an almost mystical quality in cultures that saw deep meaning in seasonal rhythms. But the Silk Road didn't just bring sweetness, it brought endurance. The next fruit was tougher, drier, and practically immortal. Meet the Chinese date, a fruit so perfectly designed for survival, it's almost like nature created it specifically for medieval life. Jujubes could be eaten fresh, dried, or stored for months without any preservation. They were nature's energy bars, packed with sugar, fiber, and nutrients that could keep you going through the hardest times. Arab traders who introduced jujubes to medieval Europe weren't just sharing a snack, they were sharing a revolution in food storage and medicine. Unlike other fruits that spoiled within days, dried jujubes could last for months, even years, without losing their nutritional value. For merchants traveling dangerous trade routes or farmers facing uncertain harvests, this was life-changing technology. Medieval apothecaries stocked jujubes like precious medicines. They were prescribed for insomnia. Medieval texts describe people eating them before bed to encourage peaceful dreams. They treated respiratory problems, digestive issues, and general weakness. Some preparations involved soaking them in wine or grinding them into energy-dense pastes that could sustain travelers for days. The fruit's chewy texture and honeyed flavor made it naturally appealing, unlike the bitter medicines that dominated medieval healthcare. Children actually enjoyed taking their medicine when it came in jujube form. But what truly set the jujube apart was its resilience. When other crops withered in drought or froze in brutal winters, this tough little tree kept bearing fruit year after year, no matter what. And yet, the next fruit offered something just as miraculous. It didn't just feed you, it helped weave the very fabric of medieval luxury. In medieval Europe, if you wanted silk, you needed mulberries. But these remarkable trees offered something even more valuable than silk worm food. They produced some of the most delicious and nutritious fruit in the known world, in colors that seemed almost magical. Mulberries came in varieties that produced white, red, or deep purple fruit, each with its own character. The white varieties were subtle and sweet, while the dark purple ones stained everything they touched with juice so intensely colored, it served as natural dye for centuries. Medieval herbalists considered mulberries liquid medicine. They were prescribed for sore throats, fevers, and blood purification. The deep purple juice was thought to literally cleanse bad blood from the body, and while medieval medicine was often misguided, they weren't entirely wrong about mulberries' antioxidant power. But here's what made mulberries truly special. They were one of the few fruits that could be eaten in enormous quantities without any negative effects. A single tree could feed an entire family for weeks, producing pounds of fruit that ripened gradually throughout the summer. The trees themselves were engineering marvels, fast-growing, incredibly hardy, and capable of producing fruit for decades. Their broad leaves provided shade, their wood was used for construction, and their fruit fed both humans and livestock. When European settlers first arrived in North America, they encountered indigenous peoples who had perfected survival through one small, incredibly nutritious berry. The Saskatoon berry wasn't just food, it was a complete nutritional system that could sustain life through the harshest conditions. These berries looked similar to blueberries, but packed dramatically more nutrition, more calcium than most vegetables, more iron than spinach, and a protein content that made them legitimate survival food. Indigenous peoples created pemmican by mixing dried Saskatoons with dried meat and fat, creating portable meals that could last for months without spoiling. By the late medieval era, European settlers in the New World were quick to add Saskatoon berries to their survival playbook. With a nutty, almost almond-like flavor, unlike anything back home, these berries were a revelation. They boiled them into jams, fermented them into wine, and dried them into winter rations that could last for months. But what impressed settlers most was the plant's incredible hardiness. Saskatoon bushes thrived in conditions that killed other crops. Brutal cold, drought, poor soil. They could survive temperatures that would freeze European fruit trees solid and still produce abundant harvests. From the cold plains of North America to the shadowed hills of Europe, our next berry wasn't just for eating, it was believed to ward off evil itself. In the medieval world, the Rowan tree was more than just a plant. It was protection made flesh. Its crimson berries were strung over doorways, carved into charms, and used in rituals that blended Christian faith with far older traditions. Believed to ward off evil spirits and dark magic, Rowans were planted near homes and crossroads like living guardians. But behind the folklore was a practical secret. These bitter berries could also be transformed into powerful food and medicine. Fresh Rowan berries are incredibly bitter, so astringent that they could make your mouth feel like it was turned inside out. But medieval cooks discovered that frost, cooking, or fermentation transformed them into something extraordinary. The bitterness mellowed into a complex tartness perfect for jellies, wines, and ceremonial meads. Rowan mead wasn't just alcohol, it was a honey-based brew infused with berries believed to combine medicine and magic. Medieval texts describe it being used for everything from stomach troubles to spiritual purification. Its deep red color was seen as a symbol of life force itself. The berries' high pectin content made them natural preservatives. Medieval households used Rowan jelly to preserve other foods, extending the shelf life of precious provisions through long winters. Hidden in thorny hedgerows across medieval Europe grew tiny blue-black berries so tart they could make a lemon seem sweet. But these weren't just any berries. They were the wild ancestors of modern plums, and they held secrets that would create one of England's most enduring alcoholic traditions. Sloe berries were nature's practical joke. They looked appealingly plump and wine-colored, but bite into a fresh one and your mouth would pucker so intensely you'd question every life choice that led to that moment. Medieval people learned to wait for the first frost, which softened the berries' astringency just enough to make them usable. But here's where medieval ingenuity really shone. They discovered that these impossibly tart berries, when steeped in strong spirits, created something magical. Sloe gin became a countryside tradition that survives today. The berries' tannins and acids balanced perfectly with alcohol to create a drink that was both medicine and pleasure. Medieval herbalists prescribed sloe preparations for sore throats, stomach problems, and inflammation. The high tannin content made them natural astringents, useful for treating wounds and digestive issues. But they weren't just medicine, they were also preservation technology. The thorny sloe bushes themselves served as natural security systems. Medieval farmers planted them as living fences that could stop livestock, wild animals, and human intruders. The dense, spiny thickets were nearly impenetrable barriers that required no maintenance. But medieval people didn't just rely on what was familiar. When they encountered new lands and new trees, they adapted quickly, especially when those trees offered food, energy, and tools all in one. Enter the hackberry, part berry, part nut, and a survival food unlike anything they'd known before. With its sweet outer flesh and crunchy protein-rich seed, the hackberry was nature's energy bar, perfect for sustaining travelers on even the longest journeys. Indigenous North American peoples had used hackberries for thousands of years before European contact, creating trail foods and survival rations that combined calories, protein, and sugar in one small package. When medieval settlers encountered these sugar berries, they quickly adopted them into their own food systems. Unlike European fruits that required specific growing conditions, hackberries thrived in the harshest environments. rocky soils, extreme weather, neglect. The trees could grow in conditions that killed other crops, making them perfect for frontier homesteads and abandoned fields. Medieval settlers discovered that hackberries could be eaten fresh, dried for long-term storage, or ground into a coarse flour that added protein and sweetness to bread. The trees themselves were incredibly long-lived and low-maintenance. Plant one, and it would feed your great-grandchildren. But perhaps most importantly, hackberries were completely reliable. Unlike other fruits that might fail in bad weather or poor soil, hackberry trees produced consistent harvest year after year. Before modern sweet apples dominated orchards, there was the crabapple. Small, gnarled, and so incredibly tart it could strip the enamel from your teeth. But in medieval Europe, those sour little fruits were absolute culinary gold, and for reasons that would surprise you. Crabapples were the medieval world's secret weapon against bland food. In an era before lemons were common, crabapple juice provided the acidic punch that transformed heavy stews, preserved meats, and grain-based meals into something approaching delicious. They created verjuice, a sour cooking liquid that medieval chefs used like we use lemon juice or vinegar today. But here's what made crabapples truly special. They lasted forever. While other fruits spoiled within days, crabapples could be stored for months in cool cellars. Their high acid content naturally preserved them, making them available long after other fresh foods had vanished. Medieval cider makers prized crabapples above all other fruits. Their intense tartness and high tannin content created ciders that were complex, long-lasting, and potent enough to make water safe to drink. In an era when clean water was often unavailable, crabapple cider was literally safer than water. The trees themselves were survivors, growing in poor soil, withstanding harsh weather, and producing fruit even when neglected. Medieval farmers often planted them as boundary markers, knowing they'd outlive generations of human owners. If you ever had the rare chance to step inside a medieval castle, you might have noticed a scent drifting through the halls, sweet, floral, and almost otherworldly. It wasn't perfume, but a fruit, the quince. Rock hard when raw, yet when slowly cooked, it released a fragrance and flavor so rich it was reserved for nobility, medicine, and myth alike. Quinces were the aristocrats of medieval fruit. Their intense fragrance made them natural air fresheners. Nobles placed them in wardrobes and bedchambers to scent linens and mask the less pleasant odors of medieval life. But their real magic happened in the kitchen, where patient cooks transformed these rock-hard fruits into preserves that glowed like liquid amber. Here's where quinces changed history. The word marmalade originally described quince preserves, not orange jam. Portuguese cooks created marmelada from quinces centuries before oranges became common. The fruit's high pectin content created preserves that set perfectly and kept for years without spoiling. Medieval physicians prescribed quince syrup for everything from stomach troubles to heartbreak, and they weren't entirely wrong. The fruit's natural compounds have genuine anti-inflammatory and digestive properties, but beyond medicine, quinces held deep symbolic meanings. Ancient Greeks considered quinces sacred to Aphrodite, goddess of love. Medieval couples exchanged quinces at weddings, believing they ensured fertility and lasting passion. The fruit's transformation from hard and bitter to soft and sweet served as a metaphor for marriage itself. Our final fruit is one that quietly captured the spirit of medieval life. Tough, unassuming, but deeply rewarding for those who knew its worth. The bullace was nature's middle ground between wild and cultivated, with just enough sweetness to be cherished and just enough wildness to survive anything. Bullaces were the forgotten middle children of the plum family, larger than sloes, but smaller than cultivated plums, with a tartness that demanded respect. They came in yellow, purple, and black varieties, each ripening at different times to extend the harvest season through autumn's arrival. Medieval cooks appreciated bullaces for their reliability. Unlike delicate cultivated fruits, bullaces held their shape when cooked, making them perfect for pies, preserves, and the slow-cooked stews that dominated medieval cuisine. Their firm texture meant they could be stored longer than soft fruits, extending their usefulness well into winter. Bullace trees did more than bear fruit. They guarded the land. Their thorny branches formed natural fences, keeping livestock in and trouble out, with no care required. And when winter set in, their fruit fermented into earthy wines and cordials, not just for pleasure, but for nourishment when it mattered most. From fruits that had to rot to be eaten, to berries that could outlast winter, these forgotten treasures weren't just food, they were survival. So which one would you try? Which do you think deserves a comeback? And is there one you'd dare to grow yourself? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this dive into the past, like and subscribe for more fascinating discoveries from the hidden wonders of nature. This is Stella Eureka, signing off.